$18. It's a joke of a safety net. It won't buy a half tank of gas, and it barely covers a decent meal. But when a desperate single dad handed his last $18 to a shivering stranger in a diner parking lot, he didn't know he was buying a miracle. Poverty is a relentless, exhausting calculator running in the back of your skull. Gabriel sat in the cracked vinyl booth of a Denny's off Interstate 80, listening to the hum of the dying fluorescent lights and doing the math. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. The rain outside was coming down in sheets, washing the grime off the asphalt and drumming against the diner's massive plate glass windows. Across from him sat his 7-year-old son, Toby, asleep against the glass, his breath fogging the pain. Gabriel looked down at the table. Lying flat against the sticky formica were 3 $5 bills and 3 singles. $18. That was the entirety of Gabriel's liquid assets until Friday morning. The math was simple, yet brutal. $10 had to go into the tank of his 2004 Honda Civic so he could make the 40-minute commute to the distribution warehouse on Wednesday and Thursday. That left $8. $8 meant a loaf of cheap white bread, a jar of generic peanut butter, and maybe if he skipped the sales tax by going to the corner bodega, a gallon of milk. He took a sip of his black coffee. It tasted like burnt copper. He didn't have a heart of gold. Most days his heart felt like an old engine belt, frayed, stretched thin and ready to snap. He was cynical bitter about the hand he'd been dealt since his wife walked out 3 years ago, leaving nothing but unpaid credit card bills and a hollow space in Toby's life. Gabriel didn't believe in karma. He didn't believe in the universe balancing the scales. He believed in cold, hard cash and the terrifying lack of it. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the concrete curb outside, right beneath the overhang of the diner's neon sign, mostly shielded from the rain, but entirely exposed to the biting wind. Gabriel had noticed her when he pulled into the lot, but he had looked away. You learn to look away. You have to. When you are drowning, you don't offer a hand to someone else going under. You just both sink. But now, staring through the rain-streaked window, he couldn't break eye contact. She wasn't dressed like a drifter. She wore a trench coat that, despite being soaked and smeared with mud, looked impeccably tailored. But her feet were bare. One high heel lay discarded near a storm drain a few yards away, its heel snapped cleanly off. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest, and she was shivering so violently that Gabriel could see her shoulders trembling from 20 feet away. Her face was buried in her arms. She looked like someone who had fallen out of the sky and hit the pavement. Gabriel rubbed his eyes. Look away, he told himself. You have $18. You have a kid. You can't save anyone. He looked back at the money on the table. Lincoln stared back at him, indifferent. Toby shifted in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, his small hand clutching the edge of his threadbare jacket. Gabriel looked at his son, then back out the window. The woman hadn't moved. The wind whipped rain sideways, soaking her legs. "Damn it!" Gabriel whispered into his coffee mug. He slid out of the booth. He gathered the crinkled bills, folding them neatly, and walked up to the counter. The teenage cashier, wearing a name tag that read Kyle and a look of profound boredom, popped a bubble of gum. 2 hot turkey sandwiches. Gabriel said, his voice flat. Mashed potatoes, extra gravy, and a large coffee, black. Kyle tapped the screen. That's $16.48 with tax. Gabriel handed over the $18. Keep the change. Kyle blinked, staring at the $1.52. Thanks, man. 5 minutes later, Gabriel carried a heavy plastic bag out the double-glass doors. The cold air hit him like a physical blow. He walked over to the curb, The woman didn't look up until Gabriel's boots splashed into the puddle right beside her. She flinched, pulling her head up fast. Her face was pale, her lips tinted a dangerous shade of blue. Her eyes were sharp, scanning him with a sudden, animal-like panic. She didn't look crazy. She looked terrified. Gabriel didn't say a word. He just held out the plastic bag. The smell of hot gravy and roasted turkey drifted up into the cold air. She stared at the bag, then up at him. "I don't have any money," she rasped. Her voice was barely a croak, shredded by the cold. "My car was... Someone took my bag. My phone." "I didn't ask for money," Gabriel said. He set the bag gently on the dry patch of concrete next to her. He set the styrofoam cup of hot coffee beside it. "Eat." She reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers brushing the warm plastic. She looked at Gabriel, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Why are you doing this?" Gabriel looked out at the empty, rain-slicked highway. He thought about the empty gas tank. He thought about the peanut butter he wasn't going to buy tomorrow. "Because it's cold," Gabriel said simply. "And nobody should be hungry when it's cold." He turned his back on her, walked to his rusted Civic, scooped a sleeping Toby out of the booth, and drove home on fumes. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He didn't want to see her eat. He just wanted to get his kid to bed and figure out how the hell he was going to survive tomorrow. Morning came with the subtlety of a jackhammer. Gabriel woke up before his alarm, his chest tight with panic. The familiar dread settled over him like a weighted blanket. The silence of the cramped duplex was broken only by the rattling wheeze of the refrigerator in the kitchenette. He sat up on the fold-out couch that served as his bed. He rubbed his face, feeling the harsh stubble on his jaw. $0. The thought pulsed behind his eyes. He had absolutely $0 to his name. The gas gauge on the Civic was buried below the red E line. He had roughly 10 miles left in the tank. The warehouse was 20 miles away. "Okay," he muttered to the empty room. "Okay. Think." He could call in sick, but calling in sick meant losing a day's pay, which meant falling short on rent at the end of the month. He could ask his supervisor, a man who possessed the empathy of a cinder block, for an advance. He could walk Toby to school, then try to hitchhike to the industrial park. It was a miserable, degrading puzzle, and he was tired of trying to solve it. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked into the tiny kitchen. He opened the pantry. One half-empty box of generic Cheerios. He poured them into a bowl, splashing in the last drop of milk, watering it down just a fraction so it would cover the cereal. He set it on the small table for Toby. He walked to the window to check the weather. The rain had stopped, leaving the neighborhood looking damp and defeated. The street was lined with cracked sidewalks, overgrown weeds, and a parade of dying cars leaking oil into the gutters. Then he heard it. It started as a low, synchronized hum. It wasn't the sputtering exhaust of his neighbor's ancient pickup truck, and it wasn't the grinding gears of a garbage truck. It was a deep, guttural purr. The sound of expensive engineering, the sound of money. Gabriel frowned, wiping the condensation off the dirty glass. Turning onto his narrow, pothole-riddled street was a massive, pitch-black SUV, a Cadillac Escalade, no, a Suburban. Behind it was another. And another. 5 identical gleaming black SUVs rolled down the dilapidated street in a slow, predatory convoy. They looked completely alien against the backdrop of sagging porches and chain-link fences. Across the street, Mrs. Gable's front door creaked open, her head poking out to stare. Gabriel's heart hammered against his ribs. Who did I piss off? When you live on the razor's edge of poverty, any deviation from the norm is a threat. Police debt collectors, child protective services. His mind raced through a Rolodex of worst-case scenarios. He hadn't paid the water bill in 2 months. Could they send goons for a water bill? No, that was insane. The convoy came to a smooth, synchronized halt directly in front of Gabriel's duplex. The vehicles effectively blockaded the entire street. For a long moment, nothing happened. The engines idled, a heavy vibration that Gabriel could feel in the floorboards of his living room. Then the doors opened. Simultaneously, from the front and back vehicles, 4 men stepped out. They were broad-shouldered, wearing identical dark suits and earpieces. They didn't draw weapons, but they moved with a crisp, hyper-aware efficiency. 2 stood by the street, scanning the neighborhood. 2 walked up the cracked concrete path toward Gabriel's front porch. Gabriel stepped back from the window, his breath catching. He looked toward the bedroom where Toby was still asleep. If they want to take the house, if they want to take the car, I'll fight. He grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the kitchen counter, his knuckles turning white. Before the 2 men reached his door, the rear door of the middle SUV swung open. A woman stepped out. Gabriel froze, his grip on the flashlight loosening. It was her. The woman from the diner. But she was entirely transformed. The mud-stained trench coat was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp charcoal suit that draped flawlessly over her frame. Her hair, previously matted with rain, was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. She wore stiletto heels that clicked against the broken pavement with absolute authority. She looked formidable. She looked like someone who owned the world and was currently deciding whether or not to sell it. The 2 men on his porch stopped parting to let her pass. She walked up his rotting wooden steps. She didn't look at the peeling paint or the rusted screen door with disgust. She just looked directly at the window, as if she knew Gabriel was standing exactly there. She raised a hand and knocked. 3 sharp, polite raps. Gabriel stood paralyzed in his kitchen. The metal flashlight suddenly felt incredibly stupid in his hand. He set it down. He took a deep breath, smoothing his wrinkled t-shirt, and walked to the door. He unlatched the chain, twisted the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. The woman stood there, her eyes locked on his. Up close, the transformation was even more jarring. There was no trace of the shivering, broken creature from the night before. But the eyes were the same. Sharp, assessing, and fiercely intelligent. "Mr. Pendleton?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, carrying a quiet power that commanded the space around her. Gabriel frowned. "How do you know my name?" "I know a great deal about you, Gabriel," she said. She glanced briefly past him, catching sight of the meager bowl of watered-down cereal on the table. A microscopic shift in her expression occurred, a softening around the edges of her eyes. "My name is Claire Sterling." She paused. "Actually, let's skip the theatrics. I was mugged yesterday. My driver was incapacitated. My phone and wallet were stolen, and I was left in the rain. Before my security team could locate me. You bought me dinner." Gabriel stared at her, then at the men in suits, then at the 5 SUVs, currently blocking his neighbor from going to work. "I bought you a turkey sandwich," Gabriel said, his voice flat. "It was $14. $16.48 with tax," Claire corrected smoothly. "You gave the cashier your last $18. I watched you empty your wallet." Gabriel felt a flush of embarrassment heat his neck. "Look, lady, I don't know what this is. I don't want to meddle. I'm late for work and I don't have gas to get there. So if you're here to say thanks, consider it said." Claire didn't blink. She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, heavy black envelope. She held it out to him. "I'm not here to say thanks, Gabriel," she said, her tone deadpan, but her eyes burning with an intense sincerity. "I'm here to settle a debt, and I pay my debts with interest." Gabriel stared at the heavy black envelope in Claire's outstretched hand. The matte paper seemed to absorb the weak morning light. He didn't reach for it. His hands remained at his sides, fingers curling slightly into his palms. "I don't do charity," Gabriel said. The words tasted like ash, but he forced them out. Pride was a stupid heavy thing to carry when you were broke, but it was the only thing Gabriel had left that belonged entirely to him. "I gave you a meal. You ate it. We're square." Claire didn't lower her hand. Her expression remained completely neutral, but her eyes narrowed a fraction. "Charity is giving away surplus to feel good about yourself. I run a multinational logistics firm, Gabriel. We don't do charity. We do return on investment." Gabriel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Right. And what's the ROI on a turkey sandwich?" "You didn't give me your surplus," Claire said, her voice dropping a register, losing the polished boardroom edge and settling into something raw. "You gave me your survival. You had $18 to your name. I had my security team run a background check on you at 3 a.m. You're overdrawn on your checking account. You're 2 months behind on your rent. Your car registration is expired. You gave away the money you needed to feed your son today to a stranger who looked like she belonged in a gutter." Gabriel felt a hot spike of anger pierce through his exhaustion. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The two massive men in suits by the street immediately tensed, shifting their weight, but Claire raised a single finger, and they froze. "You hacked my bank accounts." Gabriel's voice was a low, dangerous growl. "You run a background check on a guy who buys you dinner. I protect my interests," Claire replied without blinking. "And I investigate anomalies. You are an anomaly, Gabriel. People in your financial bracket do not give away their last dollar. They hoard it. They fight for it. You handed it over and walked away without waiting for a thank you." She pushed the envelope closer to his chest. "Take it. It's not a gift. It's back pay." Gabriel looked at the envelope, then at her face. He reached out slowly and took it. It was thick. He slid his thumb under the wax seal and tore it open. Inside was a cashier's check. Gabriel pulled it out, his eyes scanning the numbers. He stopped breathing. The world around him, the idling engines of the SUVs, the dripping gutters Mrs. Gable watching from across the street, muted into a dull underwater hum. It was a check made out to Gabriel Pendleton. The amount was $180,000. Below the check was a heavy cardstock document. A contract. He recognized the letterhead. Meridian Global Logistics. It was the parent company of the miserable distribution warehouse he currently broke his back for. It was a contract for the position of Regional Operations Director. Gabriel's knees felt like water. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe to keep from swaying. "This is a joke," Gabriel whispered, his voice cracking. "This is a sick rich person joke." "It's a signing bonus," Claire corrected gently. "And an advance on your first year's salary." "I drive a forklift," Gabriel said, looking up at her, genuine panic rising in his chest. "I load pallets. I don't direct operations." "You dropped out of Penn State, 3 credits shy of a master's degree in supply chain management when your ex-wife left," Claire recited, her tone matter of fact. "Since then, you've submitted 14 proposals to your floor manager to optimize routing in your warehouse. All of them were ignored because your manager is a nepotism hire who doesn't understand the software. I read your proposals at 4 this morning. They are brilliant. You don't belong on a forklift, Gabriel. You belong in my boardroom." Gabriel stared at her. The cynical armor he wore every day, the heavy iron plate that told him the world was rigged and nothing good ever happens to guys like him, cracked down the middle. Before he could speak, a small, sleepy voice drifted from the hallway. "Dad," Gabriel turned. Toby stood in the kitchen doorway, dragging a worn-out fleece blanket behind him. His hair was sticking up in every direction, and he was rubbing his eyes. He looked at Gabriel, then peeked around his legs at the imposing woman in the charcoal suit, the massive black cars, and the men in earpieces. Toby didn't look scared. He looked fascinated. "Are you guys spies?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. Claire's severe posture broke. The icy corporate exterior melted instantly. She looked down at Toby, and a genuine, brilliant smile spread across her face. She crouched down her expensive skirt, brushing the rotting wood of the porch. "No, sweetie," Claire said softly. "We aren't spies. We're just returning something your dad left at a diner last night." She looked back up at Gabriel. The intensity in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound gratitude. "Cash the check, Gabriel," she said, standing back up. "Buy your boy some real breakfast. Take the weekend to settle your debts. Monday morning, 8 a.m. A car will be here to pick you up. Wear a tie." She didn't wait for him to agree. She turned on her heel and walked down the cracked steps. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. She climbed into the back of the middle vehicle. The engines roared to life, a deep, unified growl. The convoy pulled away from the curb, rolling slowly down the dilapidated street, turning the corner and disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. Gabriel stood on the porch, the cold wind biting through his thin shirt. He looked down at the piece of paper in his hand. $180,000. "Dad?" Toby asked, tugging on Gabriel's jeans. "Who was that?" Gabriel swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the massive lump in his throat. He looked down at his son, then back at the empty street. The exhausting, relentless calculator in his skull, the one that had been running non-stop for 3 years, tallying pennies, rationing milk, measuring gas, suddenly went dead silent. That was... Gabriel started swiping a rough hand across his wet eyes. "That was a miracle, buddy. Go get your shoes. We're going to get pancakes." Poverty is loud. It's the grinding noise of an engine begging for oil. It's the relentless ringing of a collection agency on a prepaid burner phone. It's the deafening panic that strikes at 3 a.m. when you remember the electricity bill is due on Tuesday. Wealth, Gabriel learned, is completely silent. 3 hours after the black SUVs vanished from his street, Gabriel sat in the plush leather chair of an air-conditioned bank manager's office. The manager, a balding man who had sneered at Gabriel's rusted Civic through the window earlier that morning, was now sweating profusely. "The funds have cleared, Mr. Pendleton," the manager stammered, wiping his brow with a tissue. "Completely verified. Your temporary debit card is right here." Gabriel took the sleek blue plastic card. It weighed absolutely nothing yet. It held the gravity of an entirely new universe. He drove straight to the gas station. For 3 years, getting gas was a surgical operation. Put in exactly $5. Watch the digital meter tick upward with agonizing speed. Stop. Pray it was enough to get to work. Today, Gabriel pulled the nozzle from the pump and shoved it into the Civic's tank. He flipped the metal latch to let it pump automatically and stepped back. He didn't look at the screen. He looked up at the sky. He watched a flock of pigeons circle a street lamp and listened to the rush of traffic. Click. The pump shut off automatically. 14 gallons. Gabriel gripped the roof of his car and dropped his head against his forearm. A sudden violent sob tore out of his chest. He stood there by pump number 4, a grown man weeping openly over a full tank of unleaded gasoline. The sheer crushing relief was so heavy it brought him to his knees. He stayed there, breathing in the smell of exhaust and freedom, letting 3 years of terror bleed out into the oil-stained concrete. Next came the grocery store. Toby sat in the main compartment of the shopping cart, his legs dangling through the metal grating. Gabriel walked them down the wide, brightly lit aisles. "Can we get peanut butter?" "Dad," Toby asked, pointing down to the bottom shelf where the generic watery brand sat. Gabriel looked at the bottom shelf. Then he looked up. He reached out and grabbed the expensive organic brand with the honey-roasted peanuts. He dropped it into the cart. "We can get whatever you want, Tobe," Gabriel said quietly. They bought fresh strawberries, thick cuts of ribeye steak, and a massive box of the name-brand cereal. When the cashier scanned the items, the total came to $214. Gabriel handed over the blue debit card. No mental math, no insufficient funds warning, no asking to put the milk back. Just a beep and a receipt. A month later, the rusted Civic was gone, traded for a safe 5-year-old Volvo sedan. The cramped, drafty duplex was in their rearview mirror, replaced by a 2-bedroom townhouse in a neighborhood where the sidewalks were even. And Gabriel had a corner office. Meridian Global Logistics occupied the top 12 floors of a glass and steel tower downtown. Gabriel wasn't given the regional operations director job out of pity. The first 2 weeks had been a brutal trial by fire. He was surrounded by Ivy League graduates who looked at his calloused hands with deep suspicion. But Gabriel knew the flaw. He knew the supply chain wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was tired men, loading trucks, broken pallets, and the hard reality of physics. He implemented 2 of his old routing proposals in his first week. Efficiency in the regional hub spiked by 14%. The Ivy League grads stopped whispering. On a Friday afternoon, the heavy oak door of his office swung open. Claire walked in, dressed in her standard armor of a tailored blazer and immaculate slacks. She carried 2 dented styrofoam cups and set one on his desk. "I remember you drink it black," she said, sitting in a leather armchair. Gabriel looked at the cup. It smelled distinctly like burnt copper. He smiled. "You went to Denny's?" "My driver did," Claire corrected with a slight smirk. "I'm sentimental, Gabriel. I'm not a masochist. That coffee is objectively terrible." Gabriel took a sip. It was terrible. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. "Your overhaul of the midnight freight schedules is saving us $2 million a quarter," Claire said, crossing her legs. "You're making me look very smart for hiring you." "I'm just fixing what was broken," Gabriel said. He set the cup down. "Why did you really do it? You didn't know I was good at this job. You could have just given me 10 grand and walked away with a clear conscience. Why give me the world?" Claire was quiet. She traced the rim of her cup, looking out the window at the golden sunset. "Because," she finally whispered, "when I was sitting on that curb, freezing in the rain, I wasn't a CEO. I was just a human being, completely invisible to everyone who drove past." She locked eyes with him. "You saw me. When you had absolutely nothing to give, you bled yourself dry to make sure I was okay. The world teaches us to protect our own throats. You exposed yours for a stranger. You gave me proof that the world isn't entirely dark. That kind of proof doesn't come cheap." She stood up, smoothing her blazer, and walked to the door. "Have a good weekend, Gabriel. Tell Toby I said hello." The door clicked shut. Gabriel sat alone in the quiet office. He pulled out his wallet. Tucked behind his corporate credit cards was a perfectly crisp $1 bill. He kept it there as a reminder of the math he used to do. The exhausting calculator in his head was completely dismantled. Sometimes the world grinds you down until you are nothing but dust and empty pockets. But sometimes, when you are standing in the pouring rain, you reach out into the dark. And sometimes the dark reaches back, takes your hand, and pulls you out of the storm. What would you do if you were down to your last $18? Would you hold on to it, or would you risk it all to help a stranger in the dark? Gabriel's split-second decision didn't just change his Tuesday night, it rewrote his entire life. If this story hit home for you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist, and subscribe for the next chapter of unbelievable human journeys.